I've spent over 40 years in the Aston Martin business, and even after all that time I still find it interesting when a new piece of the company's history or a previously unknown car comes on my radar, particularly if it's a car of which I had no prior knowledge and didn't know existed. It seems sometimes I'm on a never-ending journey. So now, a couple of months after I heard of one rather special Aston Martin, one which piqued my interest, built during the so-called golden era of Aston Martin production, when the company was owned by the late Sir David Brown. This car caught my attention because of the incredible story behind it. Now, 2 months later, and after some considerable research, I'm able to share with you some details of a car, whichever way you look at it, can be considered to be all wrong, but is in fact all correct. It is actually as it was when its last renowned engineer owner last drove it, before retiring and moving to sunny Italy in 1969. To understand this astonishing car, it's probably best to tell you a little about the engineer owner, the man who made the car what it is today. And to do that, we've invited Stephen Archer. Stephen is an author of Aston Martin books, a historian, and a man who's been around Aston Martins all his life. Stephen.
Well, to understand Tadek Marek, I think the best thing to do is actually understand a bit about his life, because it's no ordinary talent that's created the engine in this car, and indeed the car we're looking at here. Because Tadek, born in Poland in 1908, was a qualified engineer. But what makes him stand out is his life story and what he did to get to the point of working for Aston Martin. And Tadek was always an adventurer, an engineer who worked tirelessly day and night on his own projects, on motorbikes and cars and so on, and he was a great driver. And in fact, his motorcycling career was going really well until he came off the banking at the Avis Raceway in 1928 and landed on 500 bottles of soda water, not doing him any good at all. In fact, 8 months in hospital, injuries from that which actually scarred him for life. Indeed, the pedal position on this car now are possibly evidence of some of those injuries that he suffered. But come 1939, he was obviously an engineer in Poland working for General Motors at the time, and he managed to, having been captured by the Wehrmacht, then escape the Wehrmacht to go to Romania. And in Romania, he appropriated an embassy vehicle in order to get back into Poland, pretending to be a German officer, so he could get back to Poland, actually looking for a girl at the time, but that's another story. And then his resourcefulness was appreciated, shall we say, by the Polish embassy, who said, can you please take these 20 vehicles to France? And this is hard to believe that he did this, but he took 20 vehicles out of Poland through Germany into France in 1940. And then from there, he basically went to ground, ended up going through Spain into Casablanca. This is pure Humphrey Bogart, this stuff. From Casablanca, he got a boat to England, and in England, he ended up doing the design work on the amphibious version of the Centurion tank, amongst many other things. His talent was identified as extraordinary during the war. But as with so many people of his ilk, come the end of the conflict, he was out of work, but he soon enough got a job with Austin, and he designed the 600 engine, which of course became incredibly famous and successful in the Austin Healey 3000. So his legacy in terms of motoring history predates Aston Martin. But in 1953, he applied for a position at Aston Martin in their design shop. And he was offered the position by Jack Sterling. Tadek went on holiday, came back to find a letter saying, we've not offered you the position. Tadek's character, though, is very well illustrated by what he did next. He said, this is a mistake, they're wrong. He went to Huddersfield, to David Brown's corporation, and said, I've got this letter, this is a mistake. You said you'd hire me. And I said, oh, yes, a mistake. Of course, they did hire him. And immediately he was put to work to design the engine for the DB Mark III, which came out in 1957, based on Bentley's engine from before the war. And 1955, though, John Wyer said to him, we need an engine for the next generation of cars, and it needs to be alloy. Well, Tadek hadn't actually designed an alloy engine until that time, but Tadek said, okay, I can do that. Jaguar were persevering with iron, heavy old iron, but no, the ethos was light, strong, powerful. The other ethos here, which is critical, and also was a challenge that Tadek gratefully grasped, was this engine has to be good in a racing car. It's not just about being a great road car engine. So this engine started off in the DB4 and was very successful in 57 and 58, straight out of the box. So Tadek's all-alloy engine was a masterstroke, and of course it continued in its developed form right through to 1973, extraordinarily even after David Brown's period. But going back to 1963, only 10 years after he joined Aston Martin, he was then tasked with developing a V8 engine. So the future was seen to be something far more powerful and more compact than the six-cylinder engine. So he designed that V8 engine, and interestingly, rather like the R2 engine, it first appeared at Le Mans in 1967 in Lola, of course, went on to power the DBS V8 from 1969 and didn't actually cease production until 2000. That V8 engine was an astonishing piece of success, a terrific design by him, which could create hundreds of horsepower, more than was ever envisaged. So his legacy of the six-cylinder engine and the V8 engine, both all alloy, remarkable, ahead of his time, and with very limited resources. These were all drawn on paper with pens, no computers, and they were stunning engines from an extraordinarily talented man.
So, Stephen, thanks very much for the interesting insight into Tadek Marek, a legend. What we do know, and what we've managed to find out, though, is in the early 60s, Tadek actually bought himself a DB4. That is this car here. And he set about over a number of years using this car as a test bed for developing ideas that went some into production later on and some not. And I think we're going to have an interesting time looking into some of the extraordinary things that are on this car.
I spent a long time looking into this car already, and it's fascinating. I mean, look, it looks like DB4, but then it doesn't look like DB4. It's certainly like an Aston. It's as an Aston should look and feel, but it's different. So many things about this car are special. But its history is quite interesting. It started its life in Saint-Tropez. The first owner suffered an engine problem. The car went back to Paris, the Paris agent, Blondeau, and then it went back to Aston Martin. They took it back in. And at that point, it was decided that this car would be used for development purposes rather than repairing it. Obviously, the owner moved on. So Marek and his small team, you've got to remember in those days, they were very resourceful, ingenious, quite improvisational actually in a lot of what they did. Yes, it was documented. Yes, it was well organised, and the skills there were immense. But they were very good at being inspirational in the way that they developed things and designed things. So the DB4 was always being enhanced through its lifetime. And this car was used as a test bed for ideas, if you will. And for the first 5 years, if you like, of Tadek's custodianship, it was intensely used at the works in Feltham to develop, first of all, the 4-litre Db5 Vantage engine, but many other things besides. They tried to develop and understand how they would work differently on the car. And it's interesting to note, for example, that this car has an oil cooler, but you can't see it. And you think, well, that's an interesting thing for a start. It works, clearly, but it's an invisible oil cooler, which is a lovely feature. I think it could catch on. So those 5 years, from 1960 to 65 of development time at Feltham, were key to forming this car's current DNA, if you like. But then Tadek took it on himself, and it became his daily transport, and his name became the logbook. He owned the car from 65 onwards, and he further upgraded it, and it was set up and developed, spec'd exactly as he wanted it. And Tadek was an excellent driver as well as an excellent engineer. So he knew how the car should be, and he had it sorted in the way that he thought a DB4 should be. So in terms of looks, he changed the bonnet, although interestingly that was actually a development idea anyway, going on at the same time. The GT front is absolutely sublime on here, but he's kept the early grille on the car and so on.
So Stephen, we're just about to look at the car, and we know there's an awful lot of detail that's very different. But what we'd like, and this is not a test, is for you to go down the car and tell us what you think is different about it, or what you know is different, because you've done the research.
Well, at first glance you say, that's a bit non-standard, but the point is it's all Aston Martin, and that's what's so fascinating about it, so glorious is the detail and the things that they did, and you know they did it, and they did it for a reason. So everything here may be a little different, but it's fascinating. So obviously you've got the different front, GT style, keeping the early grille, GT bumper here. Obviously it's retained the Series 1 type crocodile bonnet, as you would say. And then lovely to see the original chassis plates here, but fascinating on the chassis plate is showing that they've changed the engine number to match the number obviously in here, which is a special engine. It's /4 V for Vantage, 3 very early 45 DCOE 9s attached to it. It's going to be a great engine. I can't wait to drive this. So we have got here some unique features. We've got 15-inch wheels. DB4s originally had, of course, 16-inch wheels. We've got original brake types of the original Dunlop calipers, although they've been remade, I believe, or they've been re-engineered, but they are superb looking calipers. And then back here, for a Series 1, you would normally have no frame on the door. But of course, the problem with that is floppy glass and drafts and all the rest of it. So it's got a Series 2 type frame around there. Once again, no overriders on the rear. Looks like an early DB4, but of course, in reality, this is something of a trick car. And it starts here and then moves back into the car where we find the 5-speed ZF gearbox fitted in period. So you can see how they developed this thing to be the ultimate DB4. And of course, the great thing is you've got the highest performance DB5 engine you could possibly have in a car that's much, much lighter and it's shorter. So this is going to be closer to a DB4 GT to drive than a DB5, and certainly closer than it is for a DB4. First thing I have to say about this car is that this 4-litre engine is possibly the smoothest 4-litre engine I've ever experienced. I mean, it's a cliche to say turbine smooth, but this is silky and yet with such strength, such torque. And of course it's in this delightful light chassis, the Series 1 DB4 chassis. It's quite sensational. So in this very seat, in this very leather, back in the early 1960s, one brilliant Pole, Tadek Marek, was driving this very car. He had designed the engine for it. He developed this DB5 Vantage engine in this car, and boy did he do a good job. Think about this car, Marek's very own DB4. I want to say GT because he's made it into a true long distance grand touring version of the DB4, beyond what it's intended to be. With its 5-speed gearbox, and it's very special, by the way, Nardi style steering wheel, which is so comfortable. It gives that terrific feedback and feel. But the engine is just so eager and easy. The reason that Aston Martins are so great is a handful of people. David Brown, of course, John Wire, racing manager, general manager, Harold Beach designed the DB4 chassis, Ted Cutting designed the DB01, and Tadek Marek, the man of this car. He made this car into the DB4 that he wanted, the driver's DB4 that he wanted. And he's done an extraordinary job. It feels like an Aston, but it feels just, well, more DB4. I didn't think I'd ever say that. It's the DB4 more. So when the designer takes a car like this and builds it, develops it, specs it the way that he really wants it to be, he's done something very special. Apart from making this car truly unique in all the good ways that it should be unique. But I guess what you'd say is this car is the director's cut. It's the ultimate DB4 because it was the designer of the engine who said, this is how a DB4 should be. It's got a really natural urgency to it. But there's no clunks, there's no rattles, there's no protest. Even the Webbers can be reluctant, but not these Webbers. So often, Webber engined Astons have some sort of hiccup or reluctance. Not these. Extraordinary. It's almost like it's fuel injected. I'd say the setup is perfect. I'm lucky enough to get to drive quite a few Astons. And this one I've driven now, I don't know, 10 miles. And Marek's starting to talk to me. I'm feeling his input in this car, his character, not just the character of a DB4. It's just been done so well. 10 miles? Not enough. Not enough. I should be very sad to get out of this car. Partly because I can feel its history. I met Marek once. A lovely man. Straightforward, direct, actually shy. But you could sense that core intellect, that sense of purpose that he had. And he's put that sense of purpose into this fantastic DB4. So we also have Db5 Electric Windows mounted on the dashboard here. Select to ride dampers at the rear. We have a unique radio console arrangement here. Db5 instrument panel, which he had trimmed as well, which is very nice. Db5 sun visors, Db6 cigarette ashtrays in each door. Tadek was a smoker, it must be said. Which leads me to one last novel feature. Because he smoked, and even he didn't want to share his own smoke, he installed an electrically opening rear quarter light. And there it goes, opening for us right now. It's an absolute delight. Heath Robinson it may be, but really the most ingenious, very useful feature. Bless you, Tadek Marek. One of the great benefits this car enjoys is undoubtedly its lightweight. Early DB4s were, aside from the GT, the lightest of the line. So you take that light car then you put a very well developed DB5 Vantage engine in it, and you've got a very potent cocktail. A wonderful mixture of a great engine and a very straightforward and very effective chassis. This car delivers a fantastic driving experience. And why? Because of Tadek Marek, who here has made something very special.
This then is the engineer's car, and to anyone that knows the subject of Aston Martin cars, this represents a deeply satisfying journey into the mind and prowess of an engineer that is a legend in the Aston Martin world. Thankfully, saved for its next custodian to enjoy.